So let's just address this question. Is Boris Johnson's future behind him? I mean, on the front of on page 1 of your paper, Chris, today, here's the headline: "The cults of Boris and Brexit are simultaneously imploding." That is the front of the Daily Telegraph, which is not the most hostile organ when it comes to our former Prime Minister. Is it true? Is the cult of Boris imploding now?
Just take your second point there. We've been pretty tough on Boris since really the Partygate affair. We are driven by, like all papers are, by our readership. They were crossed by the rule breaking. We ran literally pages of people going after Boris for the rule breaking. So it's not a surprise to me I think maybe the prominence of that article by Camilla Tominey was interesting. I think it does feel to me that this week we have reached a moment when people looked at the chaos of Johnson, look at him with a Bible in his hand, trying to swear on his heart he'll tell the truth to his friends and colleagues, and think, is this really the person who should be running the country?
Yeah.
But I think while the cognoscenti in the village, the bubble be working, think that outside in the boondocks, outside in the wider country, people still want him back. I've had Simon Clarke, who's one of his key supporters, on my podcast tomorrow called Choppers Politics Podcast. He says, he still is a great winner. I asked Simon Clarke, do you think that will Johnson come back before the next general election? He said the following: "We have Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister, and I support the Tory government." That's not saying no. And people still do hanker after, I think, Johnson as the saviour of the Red Wall.
When you say people, I mean, we've got to say
MPs,
some people.
Some people, forgive me, some people.
MPs, and maybe a shrinking number. I mean, I was struck reading your paper today, Chris, by the piece that goes with the headline about Boris Johnson from Camilla Tominey, your deputy editor. I'm just going to quote this little bit. It says, after his rough ride in the Partygate probe, while it's always been argued one should never write off the man who twice won London along with an 80-seat general election majority, the car crash that unfolded in the Grimond room suggests the end of the road may well have been reached. And you make the point yourself, Chris, that the fact that we're reading that on the front page of the Daily Telegraph sort of bears out the headline: the cult is imploding.
I'll say one more thing. He was written off when he was sat by Theresa May in late 2018. Sure. He walked around Portcullis House, where I often spend my life now, on his own, looking quite grim. And within a year, he was Prime Minister. I just think things change so quickly. But you're totally right. Right now, it's looking very bad for the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
I think it would be very difficult for the Conservative Party to say to the country prior to the next election, we need another different Prime Minister. Well, not another different Prime Minister. The old Prime Minister who half a third of his government resigned within 24 hours.
About 60 ministers.
We want more psychodrama, because what all of us need is more psychodrama.
Yeah.
I mean, none of us, not even weirdos like you and me, Chris,
we are weirdos,
thrive on the misery of the inhabitants of Westminster, really want that psychodrama back, I have to say.
In a rational world, it would be mad.
Yeah.
And is it even rational to imagine this? Well, you can imagine anything, to be fair, but is it rational to argue that this is realistic? I'm looking at all sorts of bits of data. Here's an opinion poll just today, and it tells us that two-thirds of Britons believe that Boris Johnson was being dishonest yesterday in what he had to say. 66% think he misled Parliament. 66%, by the way, said the same thing before he said a word yesterday, and a third of the public on this poll say that the rules were knowingly broken either once or twice or many times. So look, that feeling is out there, and it is strong. And the difference, surely you can sum it up in this way. I think an awful lot of people swung in behind Boris Johnson because they liked the fact that he was basically taking the mick out of everything and everybody. And it swung around when they thought, actually, he's taking the mick out of me. And that now has sunk in a way that I'm not sure that can be dug up again.
And he claims, of course, these were work events. The actual egregious examples, you mentioned the suitcase of wine, were at parties when he wasn't present, albeit he may have lost control of the building. He wasn't there. He was in Chequers, where he spends weekends. So I think, he definitely wants to come back. He said only 5 short months ago, he wrote that statement when 100 MPs said, "Stand again, Boris. Now is not the time. Never saying never." Yeah. If he was loyal, he'd come out right now and back Rishi and try and get behind him. It's not happening yet. I just think he is holding out hope. And what you're not maybe taking into calculations, John, is that MPs will look ahead after the May locals if it's a disaster and think, who will keep me in Parliament, Rishi or Boris? And that's when it starts to move against.
Well, you made an interesting point, Chris, in your piece today, which is, let's not lose sight of the fact that it's not about necessarily who's going to be the next Prime Minister, because I think we would all put a lot of money, if we had a lot of money, on Rishi Sunak staying there and going the distance. It is also about who's going to be the standard bearer for the right wing of the Tory party. And
that's what I think the vote was about. The 22 who voted, those big names, and when it came out, Ian Duncan-Smith, Priti Patel, Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg, that was a battle for who can say they voted to save the union after Rishi's gone.
Yeah.
That's what happened there, and that's why the numbers were so small, but such a high calibre.
Yeah. Although that's a rather more limited ambition, to be the standard bearer of a wing of the party.
It's where the party is. It's where the members are, and a lot of the MPs are.
And it's also, I guess, where the party is heading, if it is heading into opposition, which will be a big old fight about its soul that makes the fights we've had over the past couple of years look like sort of child's play, I think. I mean, it may even make some of the ructions in Labour over the past few years, as it worked out its soul, look quite mild, because, I mean, the Tories love fighting. The thing that's kept them from going completely off the rails has been that they are in government. In opposition, just imagine, without any sort of responsibility at all. I think that fight, if they do lose the next election, is going to be quite extraordinary.
Well, let's just imagine that Rishi Sunak's role comes to an end, that it all goes wrong in the local election and the mood in the party is suddenly transformed, and even if there's not a massive implosion, you get a lot of unhappy people on the right wing of the party saying, look, up with this, we will not put. If it's not Boris Johnson that they turn to, and a number of them, as you say, would and might, who else? And who else is there to contest that right wing standard? Chris, you know the right wing of the Tory party. Who are we talking about?
It's hard to think. I mean, I think Priti Patel would have a chance. Suella Braverman, dropping down a generation, Kemi Badenoch, but she's not that trusted because of her feeling that Michael Gove is manipulating her, and he isn't trusted by the right. I can't see how it's another candidate who isn't Boris Johnson. I think the problem is, for me, the original sin was removing Johnson, because I think that nowadays, I know you can remove leaders and it happens, but I think generally people vote for a party and its leader, and then it should change after an election, not before.
Isabel?
I mean, I think there are a lot of people who are of the Johnson Truss persuasion who are in favour of Kemi, but I think Kemi Badenoch is, she's not quite ready yet, and I think she might be a viable opposition.
She's got to be someone who's held one of the great offices of state, I think.
Yeah,
actually.
Yeah.
And I can't see who that is, and what.
I mean, I also just think, I think the Conservative Party really would be signing its own death warrant if it changed leader.
Right.
Again.
And what about Boris Johnson's position? Because he wants to be Prime Minister. That's what he wants to be. But if and when that dream simply evaporates into the air... It will never evaporate. Well, maybe not. Let's argue that politically in the real world it's going to evaporate, and maybe to the extent that even Boris Johnson sees the evaporation take place. Let's just argue that for a second. Well, then Boris Johnson may have to surrender the dream of number 10 Downing Street, but he still needs position. He still needs profile. His life, his mode of life, his psyche requires him to be someone, and so therefore even the leader of a wing, the leader of the troublemakers, that fulfills that role. And he can still, by the way, use that to tour around Texas, doing very expensive speeches.
Well, that's where he's most happy, isn't he? Offering advice from the sidelines rather than actually doing the job he was elected to do, and he's failed to. I mean, I can see him, the party losing under Sunak, a Labour squeaking a 30-seat majority, a leadership election. Boris wins. He says he wants to have his deputy who do the day job. He'll write his books and come in age 65, when Churchill came back, by the way, in 2029 as Tory leader and Prime Minister. That is entirely believable with Boris Johnson.
Well, I can believe that he believes it.
No.
Yeah.
This is what people are talking. I mean, I think you're writing off, John. You've been in this game longer than we have.
Yeah.
At your peril.
Well, I recognise that. As you say, we've seen it come and we've seen it go. But there is a point when, I don't know, reality intrudes upon even impossible seeming scenarios, and even keeping an open mind.
I mean, watching Tony Blair give evidence last week to the Northern Ireland Committee, I think 6 people were in the audience to hear him speak. In the old days, he commanded audiences, biblical size numbers, and he can still do it, but no one really cares what he says. And at some point, that is the fate of Boris Johnson. But when that comes, I don't know, because he's interesting, and we're talking about him for the past 10 minutes.
No, that's true.
Why are we doing this? Because we are feeding into this Boris mania.
Although to be fair, we are discussing the decline of Boris Johnson, not the brilliance of his prospects. Anyway, we're going to be... Well, I'm John Pienaar, and if you found that interesting, we are here each day, Monday to Thursday,
5 o'clock till 7 o'clock on Drive, and from 7 till 8, Pienaar and Friends, where we discuss the big stories of the day each day on Times Radio.